Bismillah. My dear children, let me tell you a story from my heart. It is not an easy story for me to share, because it carries both the deepest wound a mother can feel and the strongest lesson life has ever given me. You see, I am an old woman now. My hands shake when I pour my tea, my steps are slow, and my hair is nothing but silver strands that carry decades of memories. Yet, behind these tired eyes I hold secrets. Secrets my own son never thought I had. I raised him with my bare hands. I was a widow when he was just 7 years old. His father, may Allah bless his soul, passed away suddenly, leaving me with nothing but debts and a child who needed everything. I worked in people's homes, cooking and cleaning, while my son studied in the best schools I could manage. I told myself, even if I suffer, he should never feel less than others. For years I carried the weight of both mother and father. I stitched clothes late at night, I cooked food for neighbors to earn a little money, I even went hungry so he could eat. My joy was in seeing him grow strong, seeing him walk with confidence, seeing him wear the clothes I could never afford for myself. But do you know what hurts the most? It is when the very child you sacrificed everything for looks at you with disgust and calls you a failure. Yes, those words came from my son's mouth. One evening, I was sitting quietly in his grand living room. He had a mansion now, marble floors, chandeliers, cars lined up outside like jewels, and staff who bowed at his command. All of this, I thought, was the fruit of my struggle. I believed I had succeeded as a mother. But then, in front of his wife and children, he looked at me and said, "Mother, you are a failure. You never achieved anything in life. If it weren't for me, you'd be living on the streets." His words cut deeper than a knife. I felt my heart crack open. My lips trembled but no sound came out. My daughter-in-law lowered her eyes, embarrassed. My grandchildren looked at me with confusion, as if wondering if their grandmother truly was worthless. I wanted to scream. Do you know the nights I cried myself to sleep? Do you know the hunger I endured so you could eat? Do you know how many times I fell sick but kept working just to pay your school fees? But I remained silent. I simply smiled, the way mothers do when they don't want to add fire to their children's arrogance. Still, inside me something changed that night. For years I had hidden my sacrifices. For years I had let him believe that his success was only his own. But in that painful moment I realized, sometimes silence makes people blind. Sometimes love makes them ungrateful. I knew the time had come to open the treasure chest of truth I had kept hidden for decades. Because what my son didn't know was this. While I worked like a servant, while I bent my back and scarred my hands, I was also building something quietly, piece by piece. I was not just a poor widow struggling. I was a woman planting seeds for a future my son could never imagine. And one day soon, he would learn that the house he lived in, the cars he drove, even the company he boasted about, none of it was truly his. My dear, if you are listening to me right now, I want to pause and ask you, have you ever been called a failure by someone you loved the most? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes, sharing your pain lessens its weight. That night I went to bed with tears in my eyes, but my heart was not broken, it was awakening. I whispered to Allah, Ya Rab, you gave me patience all these years. Now give me strength to show the truth. And so my journey of revelation began. But before I tell you how I revealed my secret, I want you to remember this. Never underestimate a mother. We may bend, but we do not break. We may stay silent, but silence is not emptiness. It is a storm waiting for its time. The storm inside me was ready to rise. My dear, when my son called me a failure, I went to bed that night with eyes swollen from tears. But as I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling of my little room inside his grand mansion, memories began to flood back like waves crashing on a forgotten shore. You see, children think their parents' lives began the day they were born. But a mother carries decades of stories in her chest, stories her children never bother to ask about. My son saw only an old woman with wrinkled skin and trembling hands. He never saw the young widow who once stood at life's battlefield, fighting against hunger, poverty, and loneliness, all while carrying him in her arms. I remember the early years after his father died. I was 28, still so young, yet life forced me into shoes far bigger than my feet could fit. We had nothing but a small rented room with a leaking roof. Rainwater dripped into a bucket at night, and rats would run across the floor, nibbling at the few grains of rice we had. But even then I made a promise to myself. My son will never feel poor. He will never bow his head in front of others. I will make sure he walks with pride. To keep that promise, I worked tirelessly. During the day, I cleaned rich people's houses, scrubbing their marble floors while my own floor was nothing but cracked cement. At night, I stitched clothes under a dim lantern, my eyes burning, my fingers bleeding from the needle. Sometimes I even sold food on the streets, small snacks wrapped in paper, to strangers rushing by. Yet, through all this suffering, I held on to something most widows forget. I saved. Yes, little by little, coin by coin, I put money aside. Every time I earned a few extra rupees, instead of buying myself a new dress or jewelry, I placed it into a small wooden box I hid beneath my bed. My son never knew about that box. To him, I was always just surviving. But in truth, I was planting seeds, tiny invisible seeds that would one day grow into mighty trees. I bought my first piece of land when he was only 12. It was nothing glamorous, just a barren patch on the edge of town. People mocked me, saying, "What will a widow do with empty land?" But I smiled, for I knew land never betrays. Land waits, land grows, land multiplies. Years later, I sold that land at double the price and bought 2 smaller plots. Then slowly I invested in a friend's business, a tailoring shop, then a small grocery store. I kept quiet about all of it. My son thought I was borrowing money from neighbors for his school fees. He never once asked how I managed year after year. He assumed it was luck or maybe charity. He never realized it was the result of my sleepless nights, my unshakable faith, and my stubborn will to fight. And as Allah is my witness, every time I made a little profit, I put his future first. I enrolled him in the best schools. I paid for tutors when he struggled in math. I bought him the textbooks he needed, even if it meant I wore the same old faded dress for 10 years. But here's the bitter truth. The more you give, the more some children take for granted. My son began to see my sacrifices not as love, but as obligation. He thought success was his birthright. He thought his education, his comfort, his opportunities were natural gifts of life, not the sweat and blood of his mother. When he grew older and entered business, he believed he was a self-made man. He told people proudly, "I built everything on my own." And I stayed silent, smiling quietly in the corner, letting him bask in his pride. But that silence, oh my dear, it built a wall between us. The more he grew, the more he looked down at me. His suits became sharper, his shoes shinier, his cars more expensive. And with each step upward, his eyes looked at me less as a mother and more as a burden, a reminder of a past he wanted to erase. Do you know the cruelest thing he ever said? It wasn't just calling me a failure. One day, in a moment of anger, he told me, "Mother, you know nothing about business, money, or success. You should be grateful I allow you to live in my house. Without me, you'd be nothing." I wanted to laugh then, not from joy but from the irony of it all. He thought he was the one giving me shelter, when in truth the very roof over his head was mine. He thought he was feeding me out of generosity, when in reality, the money on his dining table had once passed through my tired hands. But I held my tongue. Why? Because timing is everything. A secret revealed too early loses its power. I waited, patient as the earth waits for rain. One evening I sat in the garden watching his children play. My granddaughter ran to me, her hair flying, her smile pure. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." Those words melted my heart. They reminded me why I had endured everything. Not for recognition, not for wealth, but so that my family could stand tall. Yet it also gave me strength to know, if I remained silent forever, my son would continue in his arrogance, and my grandchildren would learn the wrong lesson about life. I decided then, the time to reveal the truth was near. I would show my son that the woman he mocked as a failure was, in fact, the very foundation of his empire. And when that day came, I promised myself I would not speak with anger. I would not shout. I would not curse. I would simply place the truth in front of him like a mirror, and let him see himself for the first time. My dear, patience has a limit. A mother can stay quiet for years, but when her child crosses the line of disrespect, silence turns into strength. After that night when my son called me a failure, I carried his words inside me like a thorn lodged deep in my chest. Every smile I gave was heavy. Every prayer I whispered was filled with sorrow. But at the same time, I knew the moment to reveal the truth was drawing close. It began one afternoon. My son held a family dinner in his mansion. Business partners, friends, and even some politicians were present. He was celebrating another victory, the expansion of his company into a new city. Everyone praised him, raising glasses, clapping their hands, saying how smart, how brilliant, how successful he was. I sat quietly in the corner as I always did, an old woman invisible to most. My son barely acknowledged me, as if I were a shadow in his grand hall. But then one of his guests, a kind man, turned to me and asked, "Mother, you must be so proud of your son. He has achieved so much. Surely the credit goes to you as well." Before I could open my mouth, my son laughed loudly and said, "Oh, don't say that. My mother? She never did anything. She doesn't understand business, she doesn't even understand money. She was always poor. Everything you see here, I built it with my own 2 hands." Everyone laughed with him. The humiliation burned my skin like fire. My lips trembled, but I pressed them together. Tears threatened to fall, but I swallowed them back. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered old documents, property papers, investment receipts, all the evidence of decades of sacrifice and hard work. I even contacted my lawyer, who had helped me manage my hidden assets for years. He looked at me with respect and said, "Madam, when you show him this, he will not know what to say." The night of revelation came soon after. My son called another meeting at his house, this time with only close family members present. He was furious because of a deal gone wrong. I sat in the living room silent, while he shouted about losses, failures, and betrayal by his partners. And then, as if destiny had pushed him, he turned to me and spat, "Mother, you are a curse. You bring no luck. Ever since you've been living here, my business has suffered. You are nothing but a failure." My heart broke again, but this time it was not the heartbreak of weakness. It was the crack before an earthquake. I stood up, slowly, carefully, using the strength of my cane. Everyone stared at me surprised, for I rarely spoke in these gatherings. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder. "My son," I said, "you have called me a failure so many times. But tonight I will show you who truly failed, and who truly succeeded." The room went silent. Even the ticking of the clock felt loud. My daughter-in-law lowered her eyes, the children froze, and my son smirked as if I had lost my mind. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a brown folder. With trembling hands, I opened it and laid the papers on the table. "This house you live in," I said, pointing at the marble walls. "Whose name do you think is on the deed?" He scoffed. "Mine, of course. I bought it." I slid the paper across the table. He grabbed it, read it, and his face turned pale. My name was there, clear as daylight. Gasps filled the room. My grandchildren looked at me with wide eyes. His wife covered her mouth in shock. I did not stop there. I pulled out another document. "This car you drive, the one you boast about to your friends, look again." He snatched the paper, his hands shaking. Once more my name stood proudly on the ownership. And then the final blow. I handed him the documents to the very company he called his empire. His lips moved but no sound came. His eyes darted across the pages, disbelief flooding his face. The company he claimed to have built with his own 2 hands was registered under me, purchased with the savings of my sacrifices. The silence in that room was heavier than any storm. I looked at my son and said, "You called me a failure. But every brick in this house, every wheel of your cars, every penny in your company carries my sweat, my hunger, my sleepless nights. You did not build this alone. You built it on the back of your mother's struggle." Tears streamed down my face, but my voice grew stronger. "I never told you because a mother does not keep score. She gives and gives, expecting nothing in return. But when a son dishonors his mother, Allah himself witnesses the injustice. And tonight, I could not let this lie continue." My son sank into his chair, his face pale, his pride shattered. He looked around, but no one dared to speak. His children's eyes were fixed on me, shining with both shock and admiration. I placed the folder on the table and whispered, "The true failure, my son, is not the one who has less wealth. It is the one who forgets the hands that raised him." That night, my revelation had only begun. My dear, when the truth came out that night, my son's pride collapsed like a palace built on sand. His hands shook as he held the documents. His lips quivered but no words came. For the first time in his life, he looked small, like the little boy who once clung to my sari when he was afraid of the dark. The silence in the room was thick. My grandchildren stared at me with wide eyes, their young hearts learning a lesson they would never forget. My daughter-in-law quietly wiped her tears, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of respect. Finally my son whispered, "Mother, how did you do all this? I thought you were poor, I thought you had nothing." I took a deep breath. My hands trembled but my voice was steady. "Do you remember the nights you found me stitching clothes under the lantern? The days you saw me come home tired, my hands smelling of soap from scrubbing other people's floors? Do you remember the evenings I sent you to eat first while I told you I wasn't hungry? Those were not signs of weakness, my son. They were the bricks with which I built your future." His eyes filled with tears but I did not stop. Every coin I earned I saved. Every plot of land, every small shop, every investment, I did it quietly for you. I wanted you to have a life of dignity. But in giving you everything, I forgot one thing: to teach you humility. My words were not spoken in anger. They were heavy with sorrow, but also filled with love. Because even in that moment, when he had humiliated me, when he had called me a failure, my heart still beat only as a mother's heart does, with forgiveness waiting just beneath the pain. He dropped to his knees before me, clutching my hands. His tears fell onto my skin, washing away years of arrogance. "Forgive me, Mother. I was blind. I was ungrateful. I thought I built everything with my own strength, but it was always you. I hurt you with my words, I dishonored you in front of others. Please forgive me." My dear, do you know what a mother does when her child begs for forgiveness? She does not count his mistakes. She does not keep a ledger of pain. She simply opens her arms because the bond between mother and child is stronger than pride, stronger than anger, stronger than even betrayal. I cupped his face in my wrinkled hands, kissed his forehead and whispered, "I forgive you, my son. But remember, forgiveness is not enough. You must change. You must learn. You must never again forget where you came from, or who carried you when you could not walk on your own." That night something changed in my son. The arrogance in his eyes melted into humility. He asked me to sit at the head of the table, and for the first time, he introduced me to his children not as just an old woman, but as the foundation of their family's honor. My grandchildren hugged me tightly, whispering, "We're proud of you, Grandma." Their words healed the cracks in my heart. I knew then that perhaps my struggle had not been in vain. The seeds I planted were not only in land and money, but also in the lessons that would now pass to a new generation. From that day onward, my son treated me with respect. He often said in front of his business partners, "Everything I have, everything I am is because of my mother." His voice no longer carried pride, it carried gratitude. But I tell you this, my dear. Wealth can build houses, but only respect can build homes. Cars can take you places, but only love can keep a family together. Companies may rise and fall, but the honor of parents is what truly sustains generations. As I sit here today telling you my story, I want you to remember this. Never call your parents a failure. They may not have degrees, they may not have riches, they may not understand your modern world, but their sacrifices, their tears, their sleepless nights are the reason you stand where you are. And if you, listening to me right now, have ever raised your voice at your mother or father, I ask you, go to them. Hold their hands. Say, "Thank you. I am nothing without you." Because one day when they are gone, those words will be the only wealth you wish you had given them. My son once called me a failure. But the truth is, a mother who gives everything for her child can never be a failure. A mother is the silent architect of her child's success, the unseen investor in their future, the invisible shield in their darkest nights. And as for me, I do not need the world to know my worth. I only need my son, my grandchildren, and perhaps you, my listener, to carry this lesson forward. Respect the hands that raised you. Honor the sacrifices you never saw. And never ever forget, the strongest empire begins with a mother's love. That, my dear, is the end of my story.